Coach, you played here. You were part of some of the most successful program or teams in this program's history. What's the journey been like for you, and now to be, part of this coaching staff and trying to help them lead back to that
Yeah.
stage?
If you would have told me 15 years ago that I'd be back here coaching, I would have said you're crazy. So it's been pretty surreal to be able to come back to my alma mater and coach. I was lucky enough to play for some great coaches back then, Chip Kelly, Mark Helfrich, along with the rest of that staff that had been here for so long. But I think now with Coach Lanning, what he's done is pretty much just take that foundation, that blueprint that's been built, over the decades here, and take it in and run with it. And the product on the field is what you see. But it's been surreal to see this place. I remember I joke with recruits all the time. When I was getting recruited, this used to be a parking lot, right? And this used to be, the grass fields outside. You'd share with soccer and with lacrosse. And the recruiting pitch back then in 2010 was like, hey, we're going to build this really cool facility. And, in 13, when they opened it and I was a player, it's like, okay, you guys followed through on that. And then you heard the murmurs when I was a player here, but we're going to build this, we're going to do that. And now to be back, like I said, and see the school just kind of come full circle and like deliver on those promises that have been promised to recruits over the years has been really cool to be a part of it.
Right here on the left, Eric. Maybe a strange way to start this, but you were a player in the trenches. Now you're coaching quarterbacks. What was your process to getting to this point, and kind of maybe how does your playing history help?
Yeah,
as you weren't a quarterback.
No, that's a great question. I get it a lot. So, obviously I came here as a defensive end. After a year I moved to tight end and I played 4 years there. And then when I was done playing, I kind of was like, what do I want to do with my life? And so I moved back home to Hawaii and I pretty much fell into coaching. I was asked at the high school I went to come help out. And so I spent a year there coaching tight ends. And then after that, I transitioned to another high school that my dad was a coach at, and was able to be a track coach there. I was a teacher. I kind of was an OC, called some plays and whatnot. And then in 2020, I had an opportunity with Todd Graham to interview at Hawaii for a GA spot. And so I went to Todd. I interviewed, and he said, hey, I have a defensive GA spot available. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll take it. Like, no big deal. And so in 20, I was a defensive line GA. And the following season, he's like, I want to move you with the offensive line. And so in 21, I was actually Elite Terry's GA at Hawaii. Got to work with the league. It was really cool. And then in 22, I was lucky enough to come out here and interview. And same process. And Coach Lanning kind of was like, hey, I have a job for you. I don't know what position it's with. I was like, fine, that's cool. And so my first year here, I was a running backs analyst, right? And then after 1 year, Dan's like, I want to move you to receivers. I said, sure. So I moved to receivers, worked with Junior Adams. And then the following year, Will was like, I want to move you with the quarterbacks. And so I've been with the quarterbacks now going on 3 years. And so I've pretty much, it's very different than most coaches' kind of process and their journey. But I think being able to have worked with all those different position groups and having been lucky enough to spend some time on defense kind of gives me a unique perspective on the game. And it's more of like a 30,000 foot view, if you will. And I'm appreciative of it. I remember when I was young, I used to look on Wikipedia pages of kind of famous coaches, and I'd be like, well, how did this guy work with all these different position groups? How do I be lucky enough to do the same thing? And I was sitting here 10 years later after starting my coaching journey. It's been, once again, another surreal experience. Like, I've had that opportunity to work with different position groups, and that's exactly what I wanted.
Right here on the left, Ryan.
How much easier does it make it having somebody that Dan just described as a coach on the field in Dante as your starter in this year?
Oh, it makes a world of a difference. I think that whole room in general is pretty mature beyond its years. But especially with Tay, this being year 3 in the system, the things that we're able to get to, the things we're able to do, you don't really get that from a guy in year 1, right? And he's seen it, having been able to sit behind Dylan Gabriel, right, and then having a year last year under his belt of a full season of starts, and now progressing here into his 3rd spring. You can see his progression, and it's funny, sometimes we'll cut on the old tape from his 1st spring here, and it's like leaps and bounds different. But it's definitely beneficial with a guy like that with so much experience, savvy as can be, very intelligent. It's fun to work with, and we're definitely blessed to have him in the room. We also have like Brock's year 3 in the system, right? Dylan's a very extremely intelligent individual. And so, like I mentioned, I think that room is mature beyond its years and very cerebral.
Back right, Aaron.
Building off that answer, how has Dylan kind of progressed since he's got on campus, especially coming off that injury?
Yeah. Dylan's progressed well. Through the winter months, we're still kind of nursing that injury. Now he's full go. He is beyond cerebral. I've known him for a little bit. I've known his family for a little bit, and I always knew he was smart. But he has really impressed me with his football knowledge. I think because of that, he's been able to pick up this offense at a very quick rate. There's really not much that we have to hold back when he's out there and we're calling periods. Like, he's pretty much in tune with everything we're trying to do, which is a lot. It is a high volume offense. And I've just been extremely impressed with his intelligence. Obviously, his playing ability speaks for itself. Everybody knows he can throw the football. He has a bunch of wins under his belt from his previous stop. But I think his cerebral ability has really impressed me and the staff and has allowed us to kind of progress him at a quicker rate.
Here on the left, John.
Dan was just in here saying that last year you had a lot of the responsibilities of this position without necessarily having the job title, just so that Will could take a bigger picture view of the offense. What did that look like for you? What were you doing behind the scenes that really prepared you to step into this full role?
Yeah, I think, I'm very appreciative of the years I got to work with Will Stein. I learned a lot of stuff from him. Just kind of the way he approached the job, the way he approached offense and his, perception of how the game plays. What did that look like? Me and Will would share responsibilities. I'd run night meetings at times. I'd run corrections meetings. Sometimes I'd run install meetings, tips and reminders during the course of a game week. So there'd be meeting time every day that I'd meet with these guys, whether it be in the morning or in the evening. Some one-on-one meetings as well. Running some periods in practice here and there, because it's funny, like, you think right? A lot of guys, young guys, I could call plays. I could be a coordinator, until you're that close to those guys and you realize the breadth of, like, what their responsibilities look like. It's hard to run a room and also be a really good coordinator. And so my job last year is pretty much take stress off of Will's plate. Like, wherever I could get in and fit in, right? Okay, hey, can you run this meeting for me? Can you do this for me, X, Y, and Z? And so, I just took those responsibilities, try to do my best at it, and progress forward.
Here on the right, Zach.
What were conversations like with Dante this offseason when he's trying to make that decision, whether he's going to come back or go to the NFL? Because obviously there's got to be a lot of trust in you and the staff that he's going to get the development that he wants.
Yeah. I think in that whole process, everybody has their own role in it, right? So, like, what Dan's role in getting Dante to come back looked different from my role, looked different from Drew's role, so on and so forth. And I think with Tay, me and him really grew a closer personal relationship through the course of last season. We really shared some, like, personal things about one another in private. And so, my role in getting Dante to come back, and it was collective effort here, is everybody involved. And my role was just pretty much to be that person he could talk to and confide in, right? Whereas, like, I really wasn't, obviously I wanted the kid to come back, right? But I wasn't going to push him one way or another. That wasn't my role in that decision, right? But it was just to be somebody I could be a sounding board for him if he will, and hear him out. And at times when he'd ask, hey, what do you think? I give him my piece, right? But I really wasn't the one pushing that rhetoric. It was more so that, hey, I have a really good private relationship with this kid, and I'm going to be that sounding board. And that was, there's other agents in that decision process that were more the ones pushing it. Hey, we can do X, Y, and Z, or this is the reason you should or shouldn't come back. But yeah, it was great. Obviously, having him come back I love the kid to death. He's jovial. We just went golfing on Easter Sunday as a quarterback room, which is really cool, right? Like, how many rooms in the country are you going to golf collectively on Easter Sunday? But that's the kind of room we have, and it really starts with him. So we're lucky. Once again, we're lucky that he came back, obviously.
Back here on the left, Matt.
Dan's talked about since day one, since he's been here, about giving guys opportunities to move up the coaching ranks. You're someone that's gone through that process of starting, as you said, with not even knowing what your duties were. Now you've got a room. Can you just speak to the overall mindset of this coaching staff, the culture here of developing younger coaches into bigger roles?
Yeah, I think that, that kind of starts with look at Dan's journey, right? It's ironic that me and him started our college coaching journey for the same guy, and Todd Graham, but, like, look at his story, right? Like, he drove to Pittsburgh and sat in an office for a couple of days until Todd would meet with him just to get a GA spot, right? So when you think about Dan Lanning as a human, like, he's extremely driven, but he appreciates guys who have the same thought process and that same kind of grinder mentality, right? So that he's created an environment here, whether it's for players, staff, the football staff, personnel staff, recruiting staff. Like, if you come in, you're a selfless human, and you are about the grind, because call a spade, this profession is pretty tough, right? Hours wise. And, but if you're committed to it and you're willing to do the work, he's willing to give you opportunities. And I think, I was lucky enough, like I said, I came in, I didn't know what my role was going to be. I kind of just took it and ran with it. I guess I did a good enough job in those early on years. My roles behind the scenes continue to increase. And I think that opportunity is available to anybody in this program. He really has created that. Just look at you look at the players on the field, you don't have to mention names, but some guys who played last season, right? You might have not thought from the public perception they would have played, but those opportunities are afforded to them just like the staff. And so I think, Dan's created a really healthy environment. There's not many like this out there. I'm blessed. Like, he could have hired anybody for this job. Like, it's the quarterback job at Oregon. I'm not naive enough to think that he couldn't have gone and hired a big name. But I'm appreciative that he trusted in me, and he has that same trust and that same mindset of giving opportunities to people throughout this whole organization.
Eric on the left. Just curious on kind of what you've seen with KJ and his development and kind of where that growth process is.
Yeah, no, I love KJ. That he's it's funny, if you don't know KJ, you think he's a really shy individual, but that kid is full of life. He's got all the intangibles, right? He's got the size, he's got the height, he's got the speed, he's got the arm strength, and he's progressed well. I think, you want to talk about guys with probably the best arm talent in the room. KJ's probably the top of that. And, he's progressing like the rest of those guys in that room. I think for him, I think this is for any high school quarterback, right? When you come from high school, like, what are you usually running? Like some type of spread system, right? Something that's pretty simplistic. And we're a little bit more NFL-esque here, which is beneficial from our guys. But that acclimation is kind of tough when you transition from high school to college. Like, you're not just playing against better players. Now the system's a little different. So I think he's acclimated well. We've definitely seen improvements this spring, and I look forward to seeing what the rest of spring looks like for him, and especially fall camp.
All right, Alec.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the things you did last year. What are maybe some things that has anything changed this year? Or is it just kind of a title change for you?
Yeah, some things have changed. I mean, obviously, you're on the road recruiting now. But in regards to the day-to-day, a lot of that's similar. Like I said, me and Will, we just play off each other last season, and a lot of it's more on me now. But, Jay Johnson that Dan brought in, I can't speak highly enough about Jay. Talk about an asset to have in that room, a guy who's coordinated at the Power 4 levels at multiple stops, a guy who's coached quarterbacks for decades. Like, Jay has been such an asset to not just the guys, but also to myself. Super appreciative of that, obviously, and we're super lucky to have him. But the day-to-day role is pretty similar. A few things have changed, but it's more or less a title change,
Two more, John, then Matt.
You're coming from the background of a guy who didn't play the position. What's just been the process for you, like learning what it takes to be a quarterback at this level, and not only just learning that for yourself, but to the point where you can actually teach it to the players?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think when you speak with the quarterback position, I've spent a lot of time in the past couple of off seasons, obviously, working with people, learning the fundamental aspect of the position, right? Because like you just mentioned, I didn't play it, right? So I don't really have that in-person experience. But I spent a lot of time the last couple of off seasons learning the intricacies of the fundamental aspect. Beyond that, like when you really start thinking about quarterback play, it's a very cognitive position, right? I would argue 80% of what they do is cognitive and cerebral. So it's like, how do I streamline their thinking? How do I streamline their thought process? I say this all the time, like, Drew Maringer is the OC. Dante Moore is the trigger man, right? So Drew's got this vision. Dante's the one on the field. So what is my job? I'm the conduit between the two. How do I take Drew Maringer's vision and how do I work with Dante Moore or all of our quarterbacks and how they perceive the game, and how do I make that and help that vision come to life, right? So when you think about coaching the quarterback, yes, the fundamental aspect I've had to learn over the years, but the more football you understand and the more football you learn, a lot of it is training these guys' minds how to think and process. And the more efficient you can make that, the better player they usually are.
Back here with Matt. Last question.
You touched on the recruiting aspect being new to you. You've been on the trail a little bit. You've done some evaluations. Can you just speak to the traits, what you're looking for on the trail to play the position?
Yeah, it's a great question. All right. You go to any 7-on-7 tournament, okay, you'll probably find 100 kids who can throw the ball. Yeah, it's probably an outlandish number, right? But you're going to find a lot of kids there who can throw the football, right? Because why? There's no pass rush. Okay, the game's not real. You're running these crazy coverages. You're running these crazy route concepts, right? Like, nothing's real. You can find a bunch of kids who can throw the football. Okay, you cannot find a bunch of kids to play the quarterback position, in my opinion, because it comes down to the cognitive aspect. You can go back through the years. Would anybody have taken Phillip Rivers out of high school with his throwing motion? Probably not. Right? Could Peyton Manning throw a spiral consistently towards the end of his career? Probably not. Right? But why were those guys such elite quarterbacks? It was the cognitive aspect of their game. It was a processing aspect. So for me, like, yes, like there are some semantics and there are some things that you need to worry about with the throwing motion and whatnot. But like, really, how smart is a kid? Right? What is his emotional intelligence? What is his football intelligence? That is one of the top things that we look for here, especially with the way that we play football, right? It's more like I mentioned, NFL style. You have to be smart to play the position, right? And especially at this place. So for me, a lot of it is getting to know these kids. Like I ask them a question like this all the time. Hey, do you like chocolate ice cream or vanilla ice cream? Okay, the minute a kid pauses, I don't really want that kid, right? Because you need to have some type of conviction, right, wrong, or indifferent. Okay, so whether you like chocolate or you like vanilla, I don't really care. But if you sit there and say, coach, I don't know. Is it melted? Is it not? What's the brand? So on and so forth. Like, what is this kid going to do on third down in front of 110,000? He's probably going to think about it more than he should. He's not going to have conviction, right? So it's, like I just said, long-winded, I understand, but it's the mental aspect is really what we're after.